Boy, we could have avoided a lot of trouble if we had just done what was hammered out in the debt ceiling deal. Do you still think that on a daily basis?
Oh, more than a daily basis, maybe an hourly basis.
All day.
We burned through 6 months arguing that the Fiscal Responsibility Act levels negotiated by Kevin McCarthy, then Speaker, and Joe Biden, President, somehow weren't good enough. They cut $1 trillion of spending, lower the baseline year over year, and have all these other reforms that we've talked about many times this year. So it's frustrating to suddenly see that that's quote unquote the law of the land. But I'm glad to see the Speaker say that in his letter, because that means that is the top line number for completing the FY24 appropriations bills before January 19th and February 2nd.
Okay, so does reading that it is the law of the land reduce the odds in your mind that part of the government will shut down after that date, Congressman?
I think it reduces the odds if the Senate steps up and starts some informal negotiations on 2, 3, or 4 minibuses, as you described, because that's really where the House is. We don't want one big omni. We've made that clear. We have 2 different dates. We broke the 2 sets of appropriations bills into 2 different dates to help the Senate out, to give them a little direction. Mm-hmm. But they could break it down further if they wanted to. And I hope that speeds the process to a conclusion, because the biggest issue, of course, is spending. But now the House is in a position to argue with our Senate colleagues. We want these policies versus those policies, and that work takes time, so they need to get after it.
Boy, it's been suggested on the program today, Congressman, that the Speaker had to send that letter as a message to his own conference, because he's got a lot of worried members on his hands. I think he might work with Democrats, do another CR, get everybody all worked up and angry again at the beginning of the new year, that it was more for his own conference, your conference, than it was for the White House. What do you think? Will this calm some minds?
Well, it certainly gives some clarity. Just a little over a week ago, the House Freedom Caucus, led by Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, voted or announced that they as a group supported those Fiscal Responsibility Act levels. This is what we've had trouble with all year. It's what caused Kevin McCarthy his loss of his speaker's chair. So the bottom line is we've known this for several days now, but this is the first time that the speaker has said that those FRA levels are in fact the level for the appropriations bill. So, let's get going is what I would say. We've debated this for 6 months now fully. We know every intimate detail in these appropriations bills. Let's bring them to a conclusion.
Well, Congressman, speaking of conclusions, it's not just the appropriations bills that were addressed in Speaker Johnson's letter. There is also the matter of supplemental security funding. We, of course, saw that quote-unquote test vote failing in the Senate today. The Speaker pointed to that, saying it demonstrated there is no path forward on Ukraine funding without meaningful transformative change in policy at our southern border. Congressman, how do you think this gets solved, that these 2 issues ultimately are reconciled? And is there any chance that it happens next week?
Well, in my personal view, I think it's possible, but a low probability event that it gets done next week. But I want to emphasize that it is possible. That test vote in the Senate was important. House Republicans under both Speaker McCarthy and Speaker Johnson have made clear since September that we think serious policy reform on the border is critical. The president's supplemental appropriation only supported more money for things related to the border. House Republicans, and now, as you see, Senate Republicans want actually policy reforms in addition to kind of any kind of spending number. And I think it will be linked to the Ukraine supplemental. In the meantime, the committees, Intelligence Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, House Armed Services Committees, and others have been parsing and meeting with the Office of Management and Budget and their colleagues on the president's request. So that work has continued apace in both the Senate and the House. But in my view, I think it's not a high probability event next week, but could be possible if leadership on both sides of the Capitol gets serious.
That'd be a big deal, Kailey, if that emerged. Congressman, we've had a bit of a conversation going with you the past few weeks about FISA 702 and the renewal of this warrantless spying program that is focused on bad actors abroad, but frequently scoops up communications with Americans, which is what makes it controversial. You've been pushing for its renewal. It appears there is an agreement now, and you can tell us about it, I'm sure, because I think you were part of it, for a short-term extension to bring it to April. It would be part of, you've got a vehicle now, the NDAA. Will it move forward in its current form, or will there be privacy protections added to it? Congressman, what does it look like?
Well, in the NDAA, the only provision is to not let Section 702, which is the surveillance of foreign nationals using data from big data companies like our telecommunications companies. That's what I did not want to see expire at 12/31. With that said, the important work that's being done in the House Judiciary Committee and House Intelligence Committee is a complete reform of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and the process used by the FBI. All this is being, I would use the word radically improved and reformed in light of the catastrophic behavior by the FBI in and around Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump's campaign, the Carter Page matter, and everything that people really are very well aware of, including FBI agents querying members of Congress and using 702 surveillance authority on Americans without following the existing rules. So, Joe, this is a major change. I want to see these reforms passed as well. If we can do that next week, which we're going to try to in the House, that would be good to get both the reforms and the extension of 702. I think that would please members of Congress mightily and would be better than a simple extension of 702 until April that's contained in the National Defense Authorization Bill.
Yeah, until April 19th. So if the reforms don't happen by that date, Congressman, would we then be looking at a FISA expiration that actually happens, if not December 31st, but then in April?
Yeah, look, Kailey, this is so important. I don't think you want to be debating something this technical and this important during a presidential election year. I mean, this is why I've been urging the House Intelligence and Judiciary Committees to get with the Speaker and get a plan to get these reforms approved by Congress. We have bicameral, that means the House and Senate, bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans support the House Intelligence version of these reforms, which contains the Judiciary Committee input. But we actually have a bicameral bill and a bipartisan bill that if it gets put on the floor, I think it will pass. And it has all the protections that we've talked about, plus the continued use of 702 against foreigners who are trying to traffic people or drugs across the southwest border, or hide hostages in Gaza, or attack military operations or American interests around the world. So it's an important surveillance tool. I think it's possible we get this done next week, and then we wouldn't have to worry about the April 19th date in the NDAA.
Spending time with Congressman French Hill, the Republican from Arkansas, with us on Bloomberg Sound On. A headline just crossed from Politico, Congressman. House panel, this would be education, to launch a probe into Harvard, MIT, Penn, after those three school presidents were, I guess, well, it was testimony, but one that outraged people around the country. We were talking about it a bit earlier when it comes to anti-Semitism on campus. Is that a probe that you support?
Look, I support tolerance on college campuses. When I was in college, we had on our campus people from Omar Bradley, the famous World War II general, to Stokely Carmichael. And we didn't have problems. People treated different voices on campus with a reception. There might be protesters, but they were heard. They were heard, and there was balance in that. And that's what we need on campus. And we don't need people supporting radical philosophies on campus and have the cover of the campus administration. That makes no sense. I love the approach that the University of Chicago has and my alma mater, Vanderbilt, have. There is no safe space. We support the First Amendment on our campuses, and we tolerate different viewpoints on our campuses. This has just become a mob scene on some campuses, and it's alarming to people, in addition to the hate speech that it contains.
Yeah. Well, while that hearing with those presidents, as Joe was referring to, got a lot of attention earlier this week, so too did a hearing yesterday, Congressman, of all the big bank CEOs. And I want to call attention in particular to one interaction that happened between Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts and JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon. It was on the subject of crypto, which I know as the chair of the Digital Assets Subcommittee you care very much about. Here's that exchange.
I've always been deeply opposed to crypto, Bitcoin, et cetera. You pointed out the only true use case for it is criminals, drug traffickers, anti-money laundering, tax avoidance, and that is a use case because it is somewhat anonymous, not fully, and because you can move money instantaneously, and because it doesn't go through, as you mentioned, all these systems have built up over many years, know your customers, sanctions, OFAC, they can get bypass all of that. If I was the government, I'd close it down.
Congressman, we only have 30 seconds left, but I have to get your response to Mr. Dimon's words.
Well, I welcome Jamie visiting with me so that I can inform him about how Congress has created a regulatory framework that resolves every issue he raised, both in the stablecoin legislation authored by Patrick McHenry and the bill that G.T. Thompson of Pennsylvania and I have written that directs the SEC, the bank regulators, and the CFTC, the Commodities Future Trading Commission, exactly how to regulate and protect consumers, investors, and innovators in and around digital assets, including Bitcoin and crypto.